How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Mardiege, here today on a Friday, January 17th, just one day away from the start of the divisional round, starting tomorrow with a couple games and ending on Sunday with the next two. We're going to break them down. We're going to break down the last couple games here on today's show, looking at the Bills and Ravens game, as well as the Eagles and Rams game, both of them being played on Sunday. But that's not all we're going to discuss on today's show. We're also going to be giving our power rankings for the last remaining teams in the playoffs. We're going to be going into some more open-ended questions, talking about the Eagles' pass game, whether or not we feel like that's an actual problem, or if things are being overblown, as well as talking about some potential upsets we could see in the array of games that we have this weekend. So all of that is coming up on today's show. Before we get started, though, and before we start previewing any of these games, a quick reminder to you guys, if you guys want to get involved with any of the live shows through any questions, comments, or any opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight is always greatly appreciated, and we always love it when you guys give us a different perspective on any question or just anything you have to say on whatever we're talking about in any of these live shows. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the live shows, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the Super Chat feature. You can use the Super Chat feature by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. And we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love. And again, we appreciate it whenever you guys are able to do that. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. We always love hearing your guys' thoughts, opinions, or just any sort of different perspective you could bring to these discussions, basically. So that is that, and we could start talking about football. Now, the first game I wanted to mention here is the first game on Sunday, right? This is the first game of the games on Sunday, like I mentioned, and it's another rematch game, right? And I think people from just, a week buildup of, watching TV and watching a bunch of different people talk about it, as well as, us on this show, it feels like this is the game that a lot of people are labeling or tagging as the one to watch for a potential upset, right? Out of all the underdogs, the Rams enter this game at 6.5-point underdogs, I believe, and even still, I feel like the talk around them and the excitement around them is definitely more built up than any of the other teams that are also underdogs going into the divisional round. And in this matchup between the Rams and the Eagles, like I mentioned, it's another one of the rematches that we have this upcoming weekend. And the last time they met, they actually played in Los Angeles the first time around, where the Eagles won 37 to 20, I believe, was the final score. And in that game, obviously the biggest takeaway was Saquon and just really the entire running attack of the Eagles, right, where Saquon rushed for 255 yards, 302 scrimmage yards, and 2 touchdowns on the day, and he broke off a couple of those 70-yard scores as well. So complete domination. I would say the most complete and just unfairly looking matchup of the entire season for the Eagles, or really just Saquon. That game really, like, the Rams could not do anything, even if they wanted to, and they were 100% trying, obviously, right? But it just felt inevitable, right? Once he got one of those big runs to go, it just snowballed from there. So that was a pretty lopsided victory, to be fair, and the Eagles ended up winning. But both of these teams are also coming off of victories over teams they also previously played in the wild card round, right? The Rams previously played the Vikings and they beat them, and the Eagles previously played the Packers and they beat them again as well. So now each of them the Rams and the Eagles are trying to continue that streak and sweep another opponent on their way to the NFC Championship game, right? And obviously, when you have such a tremendous amount of success against one team running the ball, right? Because 255 yards is nuts, right, in just a single game. But it just means that the Eagles are obviously going to do that again, right? They're going to try to run the ball, right, to no one's surprise. But what's interesting, and something I didn't know, and I actually learned of over the course of, preparing for this segment, was that Sean McVay is the only coach in NFL history with 12 playoff games without allowing a 100-yard rusher. He hasn't allowed a single 100-yard rusher over his last 12 playoff games. That's the most in NFL history. And just a completely obscure fact that fits so perfectly into this narrative, right? Not just because he's facing Saquon, but because the first time they played, Saquon absolutely took over that game. And now I like how in the playoffs, you look at this matchup, right, and you think, oh, Saquon's probably going to run for 100 yards again, right, because it was so dominant the first time. But the thing I really like about the playoffs, too, is that you can kind of see a different level. And Sean McVay actually talked about it a little bit when he was referencing Matthew Stafford, was that in the playoffs, whatever happened in the regular season, it always just feels like a whole different, just part of the build-up to where you are now. Of course, you take some stuff from it, but it doesn't really affect it too much when you get into the playoffs. And Sean McVay, like I mentioned in reference to Matthew Stafford, said that at practice, he just felt like a different aura when he was around Matthew Stafford. And I think that those sort of different feelings and preparations and just subtle differences you notice in a regular season game compared to a playoff game, I think do exist. So it doesn't really surprise me that this is true, right? Because I think of Sean McVay in the highest regard when it comes to head coaches, and that's a phenomenal stat, right? Because if you're able to shut down the run like that, it's no surprise why, they always have a chance in the playoffs, it seems. So we'll see, who ends up winning that battle. That's going to be probably the most important one to win on Sunday. But, just elsewhere around the field, really, with two very talented teams, we got two of the best young defensive lines on each side. You talk about Kobe Turner, Byron Young, Jared Verse, and Braden Fisk drafted this year. And then on the other side, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat, who isn't necessarily young, but he's also a very big contributor as well. So two of the best young defensive lines for the most part. Two quarterbacks also that could not be more different, and not just because of the age, obviously, but Matthew Stafford can throw you to death all game. He could win the game just basically throwing it and running it maybe 15 times if he wanted to. That's, his skill set. That's what makes him very talented. And Jalen Hurts, not that he's a bad thrower, but he just has that running ability, right? That dynamic ability that Matthew Stafford doesn't necessarily have anymore, to the consistency of Jalen Hurts. So we got those two differing matchups and two of the best wide receiving duos in the NFL. You look at going back to the defensive lines, right? Sam Darnold got sacked 9 times by the Rams defensive line, and it'll be interesting to see just how much initial pressure they show, whether or not they bring a lot of pressure initially, they show a lot of pressure and then bail. All those little things is going to be fascinating to watch. And something else quickly before we get into the other stuff is the cold weather, right? It always feels like it's kind of a factor. I don't really like to buy into it, but, you can't ignore it sometimes. So the cold weather, Los Angeles coming over from the warm weather and playing inside, is that going to be something, or is it just nothing really to worry about, right? It is a problem for some teams, but I'm not buying it with the Rams, just so you know. But in terms of injuries, as we keep going, the biggest one for the Eagles is Nakobe Dean, their starting linebacker. He is going to be out for the remainder of this year, obviously, and maybe a little bit into 2025 because of that knee injury that he suffered. So it's a pretty big loss for the Eagles defense, and what's interesting too about that is that you could see Jeremiah Trotter Jr. out there, the son of the former Eagles linebacker Jeremiah Trotter. His son was drafted by the Eagles this year, so you might be able to see him out there, and you might be able to see Trotter on the back of a jersey yet again, which would be pretty cool. And he had a very good career at Clemson. So making his debut like this, I don't know if as a starter, but it'll be something cool to watch, certainly. They seem to have a lot of confidence in him. And, outside of that, Dallas Goedert missed practice with an illness, but I'm sure that won't hold him off. For the side of the Rams, Ahkello Witherspoon is dealing with a thigh injury, and he didn't practice yesterday, while Tyler Higbee, dealing with that chest injury, he was a limited participant yesterday as well. So things just to keep an eye on, but I don't think it'll be such a big deal. And then the keys to the game, one for the Philadelphia Eagles is to take advantage of the Los Angeles Rams' focus on the run game. I mean, this was eerily similar to when the Eagles were playing the Steelers, and I would know because I was at that game that leading up into that, there was all that talk about the problems with AJ and Jalen, how AJ wanted the ball more and things like that. A bunch of stuff that I knew once we got into the game, once I was watching the game live, that like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, they were going to kill the Steelers that day because, of course, they were going to do it because it's not like the Eagles, just because they don't throw the ball doesn't mean they're not capable of doing it. And I'm going to talk about that more in a couple segments, but people get wrapped up in it. Like AJ not getting the ball, yeah, he might show some frustration and then it's all brought up again. But in that game, they have a great game throwing the ball. They're celebrating, laughing about it. And Jalen Hurts comes to the press conference after and he says, "Is that what y'all wanted to see?" Right? Like they're able to do it, just like it might not be required each and every game. So they should take advantage of that. If the Rams are going to go all out to take away Saquon, they have more than enough talent at wide receiver to get the job done, right? I'm sure they're going to see a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of favorable matchups in some instances, so take advantage of that when you're able to, right? If you're Jalen Hurts, don't show any hesitation. And for the Rams, the red zone defense is going to be huge, right? If they could hold off touchdowns and just settle for 3 points and only give up 3 points, I should say, that's going to be basically like giving up no points, right? Because you could work with that with how talented their offense is. So making sure you're only giving up 3 instead of 7 is going to be huge for them. And then the matchups, I mentioned it before, Rams, young defensive line going up against Saquon. We just talked about how Saquon dominated the first game, so how do they improve upon that? And the second matchup, much like the first game, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua going up against Quinyon Mitchell and Darius Slay. And connected to that matchup is the last matchup I have on here, Kyren Williams up against the Eagles front seven. Without Nakobe Dean, we'll be able to see how big of a loss that turns out to be based on how, well Kyren Williams is playing. So those are the matchups, things to just keep an eye on. And in terms of my prediction, I'd like to just throw in a couple upsets because I think last week it was the Commanders, right? There was something about it that was telling me to go with the Commanders over the Buccaneers, and I'm not getting that same feeling here. But regardless of that, I'm still going to pick the Rams because I feel like, just there's got to be some sort of unpredictability about these playoffs, and I just feel like the Rams are like one of those teams that, you kind of discredit, you don't really put too much attention on, and they got the coach, the quarterback, the skill position players you need to be successful. And a young defense that's naive, that's young, that's fast, that's careless in a good way, for a lack of a better term. They don't know what's good and what's not good. So they're just going to go out there and really not have too much of a care in how they play. And sometimes, playing so free without so much tension in these games can be a great thing. So I think they're going to perform well again. They're going to do just enough to stop Saquon. And I'm not saying it's going to be a blowout or anything, but I feel like it's going to be very close. And either Jalen might not get it done with his arm, or Matthew Stafford's going to have the ball last. And I feel like the Rams are going to win. I feel like they're in a good groove right now, right? They got into the playoffs. That's what everybody didn't want to happen. So now that they're in, now they're going to show everybody why they are truly one of the best teams still in the NFC. So I'm going to go with the Rams. I feel like there's going to be an upset coming in at least one of these games. So that's my pick for that, but we're not going to move too far off of these games because we have to preview one more game, arguably the best game of this weekend between the Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. So don't go anywhere. We're going to do the same exact thing again, but just talking about the Ravens and Bills game.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Again here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast, and we're going to preview now the next game we have on here between the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. It almost escaped me there. But yeah, the Bills and the Baltimore Ravens, the amount of just absolute cinema with this Bills and Ravens game is up there amongst some of the best, all-time classics that I think I've witnessed, honestly. And I don't even think I'm overhyping it, honestly, because this will be the closest matchup, I think, of this divisional round, just based on the matchups and things like that. I think this is definitely going to be the one that gives us the most, wow moments, kind of just unforgettable moments and great, football all around, great level of football. So, kind of breaking it down here and all the many narratives that we have going into this game, right? We have Baltimore traveling to frigid Buffalo, right? You're going to see some snow on the ground, cold temperature, crazy atmosphere with all those fans up there in Buffalo. It's what, playoff football essentially is, right? In an ideal scenario, right? You got the snow, the cold temperatures and things like that. You're going to really see who wants to be out there and who really wants to win in these awful temperatures, honestly. And, you got the top two MVP candidates facing off. That's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Both quarterbacks who were taken in the same draft, now both having great years this year in 2024, 2025, and they're always going to be connected, right? Just because they were drafted in the same class. So you have that surrounding this game. Both quarterbacks and really just both teams trying to earn another shot at taking down the Kansas City Chiefs, because I already predicted the Chiefs were going to move on. So I already have them already just waiting there in the conference championship, right? And both of these teams would love another shot at trying to beat Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. So that's what's also at stake, right? Getting another shot at kind of defining your legacy in a conference championship game. And also, both of them could make it to their first Super Bowl as well by getting one of the other player out of the way and just being one step away from making it to the first Super Bowl, right? And also, you look at the Bills, they're trying to avenge their 35-10 loss earlier in the year, and Baltimore, in a way, they're trying to validate that Derrick Henry, addition this offseason, right? Because, what else does this team truly need to improve upon from what team they have right now? You know what I mean? It's like it's hard to pick out how much better the Ravens could be. This is clearly their most talented team up until this point. And yeah, I mean, to validate this signing, you got to make it at least to the conference championship, right? Or they're going to start looking at this Ravens team pretty sideways, right? Like, what else do they need to get to a Super Bowl, essentially, right? So that's also at stake in this game. And these two teams don't really play too often in the playoffs. The last time they played was in 2020 in the divisional round as well, where Buffalo won that game 17-3. If you guys remember, that was a game where Lamar threw a 101-yard interception in that game. So that was the play that really stood out from that matchup. But the Bills already have one up over the Ravens in a playoff matchup. And while both teams are obviously different since that point, and even, since they last met in week 4, right? Because, you look at this matchup now, you got Amari Cooper on the Bills, you got Matt Milano playing. He was dealing with a pectoral injury, if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of the year. That kept him out the majority of it, but now he's back, he's looking good, ready to make an impact for this defense. And unlike the first matchup, there's no Zay Flowers, most likely, in this game. So the Ravens are going to be without one of their most impactful weapons, where last week they probably didn't need him against the Steelers, but they would love to have him this week against the Bills. But unfortunately, just based on all the reports, it doesn't look like Zay Flowers is going to play. So there's a lot of new players going to play in this game, and one that is not going to play this time around. So on that note, right, when you get beat up like that pretty badly, 35-10 the first time around, you obviously want your revenge, and you obviously want to show that you're a lot better than that, obviously, especially when you're playing at home. And I thought that the Bills defensive tackle, Daquan Jones, said it the best when describing this game. He said that it was going to be a bloodbath, plain and simple. And, I couldn't agree more. Kind of graphic, but, it's extremely true when he's talking about two teams that are very, very determined to run the ball, two teams that have two of the best, if not the two best, running quarterbacks in the NFL, a ton of weapons everywhere, and their quarterbacks just really being the system that the entire team revolves around, and both quarterbacks just really elevating the rest of their squad to just different heights, right? They are what makes this team a lot better, and Lamar and Josh, do a lot for their overall offenses in that sense. So you have that aspect of it. You have the Ravens also, that are the first team in a regular season to exceed 4,000 passing yards and 3,000 rushing yards, both in the same year. And you look at Derrick Henry and his impact, obviously, right? Almost getting to 2,000 yards. He had 16 rushing touchdowns, but what a lot of people don't, I think, bring up, just because I feel like a lot of people aren't aware of it, is that James Cook also had 16 rushing touchdowns. Him and Derrick Henry were tied for first in that category. So as dominant as Derrick was, definitely I would say more dominant than James Cook, but that's just because the whole thing revolved around Derrick, right? Justice Hill's there, but you got James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson running the ball for them. And still, James Cook did break 1,000 yards, and he had 16 rushing touchdowns, which is very impressive and something that the Ravens are going to have to monitor in this game. And you want to talk about different aspects of this team. I just mentioned the Ravens and, 4,000 passing yards, 3,000 rushing yards. But the Buffalo Bills, in terms of what they bring a lot of variety, a lot of moving parts, and just a lot of different options that the Ravens are also going to have to keep track of, right? They've had 13 players with a receiving touchdown this year. That's got to be amongst the most in the NFL, or the most in the NFL, because they got a bunch of guys that can go to. And I believe, I don't know if you can, calculate this, but I know that the Bills are probably the most healthy team in the NFL. At this point, they're not really dealing with too many injuries, so they got a bunch of guys that they can go to. It's not like they're missing, Amari or Keon Coleman like they were. All of their weapons are going to be there, so that just adds another little wrinkle to this game. And like I mentioned before, Zay Flowers is really the only major injury. Like I said, both of these teams outside of Zay Flowers are pretty healthy. So we'll just move on to the keys of the game here for the Baltimore Ravens. On that topic on Zay Flowers, right? To me, one of the keys they would need to do to win in this game is to just not be afraid to throw, even without Zay Flowers, right? Because my whole mindset going into this game is that the Bills are obviously going to try and take away Derrick Henry, and they might feel like they have a more favorable matchup against Rashad Bateman or against Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely. They might have single coverage over there, or they might have a corner over there on them, right? Just in single coverage. And if that turns out to be the case, if you're Lamar, I know it sounds a little bit crazy because the whole narrative around the Ravens is run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. Don't go away from what makes you you. But in this case, if the Bills are doing everything, sending basically their entire defense to stop Derrick Henry and Lamar from running, you got to take advantage of those opportunities. And I wouldn't even classify them as like risky opportunities because I like the matchup. I like Mark Andrews one-on-one against most defenders. Same thing with Isaiah Likely, and I think Rashad Bateman's played very well for them. So don't be afraid to kind of test out and give your guys a chance, despite the fact that you're missing your Pro Bowl wide receiver. And for the Bills on the other side, just make sure that Josh Allen is affecting this game with his legs, because a lot of the times it's something that in the AFC you don't have to worry about it too much. I guess other than Josh and Lamar, it's really them and then everybody else. But the Ravens don't really got to deal with it. It's funny because they torment all these other teams with their running quarterback, and they, I guess, in a sense, don't really have to face it all in all too much each and every year because they don't play the Bills every year. So, making sure that they kind of get a little bit of their own medicine, having Josh Allen run it when you can, getting those tough yards because he has a huge frame, obviously, making sure that he's involved in the running game. Because once you get that going, you get Josh moving athletically, and he's making some of the throws that he has to make, I feel like their offense just looks a lot more free-flowing, right? They get into a groove a lot quicker. So making sure to do that early in this game where you might catch the Ravens off guard a little bit. But that brings us to our matchups for this game. And in these matchups, I have the tight ends for the Baltimore Ravens going up against potentially linebackers out there, right? Because if the Ravens are lining up in heavy sets and, big personnel with a 6 offensive lineman and Patrick Ricard out there who weighs like 300 pounds as a fullback, moving athletically as anybody else on that field, if you got these tight ends on linebackers, you got to throw them the ball. And I know, again, it sounds crazy because everyone wants the Ravens to stick to themselves and run the ball, but if I have Mark Andrews on a linebacker, I'm throwing him the ball. Same thing with Isaiah Likely. I think that's going to be a huge matchup to kind of counteract the strategy of the Bills. Also, the cold weather. The cold weather against everybody out there on the field. It sounds kind of silly, but going up there to Buffalo in all that snow and freezing temperatures, the cold doesn't feel nice to anybody. So it really becomes like a mental thing. Like once you're out there and maybe you're getting, run over for a drive or two. Maybe on offense, right? Like some guy's just beating you on the edge if you're an offensive lineman, right? You just got to move around a lot, and maybe the cold is just really not doing it for you that day. And it's really going to be up to some players to kind of get over that mental thing. And the players that, are really unaffected by it the most, it sounds kind of silly, are the ones that you're going to see flying around out there, really not being affected by it at all. And that's a huge thing. You don't want anybody being tight out there or uncomfortable. You want to get over that mental hurdle. And that's, a battle that everyone's going to have to face. So I had to put it up there in the matchup. And, we can't overcomplicate it. It's going to go down to Josh against Lamar, right? In these games where you have a lot of talent all over the field, but it all ultimately ends up coming back to Josh and Lamar. They've been tied to each other because they were drafted together, and now this year, right, both having MVP caliber years. Lamar making the first team All-Pro, Josh Allen missing out, some guys being mad about that, on the Bills. So this is an opportunity to show Josh against Lamar, right? Whoever ends up winning this game, it's going to feel like we're going to get a definite answer as to who had the better year, right? If Josh goes out there and beats Lamar, but Lamar wins an MVP, not that it makes it insignificant, but you almost feel like Josh came out of this battle as the winner because he's the one moving on and maybe winning the conference championship and maybe moving on to win a Super Bowl potentially, right? And it all starts with this matchup, and it could be the same thing for Lamar on the opposite side, vice versa. So it's going to come down to these quarterbacks. It usually always does in the biggest of games, and we'll see. We'll see who makes the throw, the game-winning, first down conversion and things like that. Who makes less mistakes. All of these things are going to come into effect, and those guys are at the forefront of it. So that's all the matchups. And in terms of who I think is going to win, I'm going to go with Josh and the Buffalo Bills. I think having home field advantage, the additions of Amari Cooper and Matt Milano are more significant than a lot of people think, especially when the Ravens don't have Zay Flowers. We saw them kind of stall out a little bit last week against the Steelers. Not that it made me think that the Steelers were going to come back, but the Bills are a different story. The Bills are not the Steelers. The Steelers are nowhere near what the Bills are. So, if you stall out for a drive or two, or maybe even more than that, it could be a problem with the Bills that want to do the exact same thing you're trying to do to them, right? Bully them, run the ball on them, and just get them to kind of quit morally, right? Kind of just get them to check out, essentially, right? When it becomes a bit of a drag to go out there and try to tackle Josh or James or Ray Davis or Ty Johnson, all these guys, right? It gets to a point where some guys just don't feel like doing it anymore. So I feel like all of that is going to be a huge part in this game, and I feel like people just dismiss the Bills because of the last game, and of course it's important to take some things from it, but I value all the variety and the different options that the Bills have in their offense, and they're extremely healthy, so that definitely accounts for something. But I'm going to go with the Bills. I think they're going to win, and we know that the Bills and the Chiefs are going to play. If the Bills win, it's going to be Bills and Chiefs. Houston Texans. I think the Chiefs are just going to be there waiting, so when that moment comes, it'll be exciting, but for right now, we're going to move on, and we got a couple other segments to talk about on today's show, talking about, coming up after the break, the Philadelphia Eagles a little bit more, and the lack of a passing game, I guess, for some people is not something that they feel comfortable with. I've seen a lot of criticism on Jalen Hurts, a lot of doubt going towards him and their passing game, so we're going to talk about it now. Whether or not this is actually something that's a worry for the Philadelphia Eagles or if people are overblowing it. And I'm going to answer that when we return right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back here into the action now, back on the Chip Shot Football Podcast, we are discussing something that I've seen over the last few days regarding the Philadelphia Eagles. And obviously we saw, last week how the Eagles really dominated the Packers in their matchup. And again, it was one of the games where I never really felt you saw the first play, right? The Packers fumble, the Eagles score, and then I'm already thinking man, that was not how this was supposed to go, right? I thought this was going to be closer, and it just really never turned out to be like that. But, the conversation really focused on Jalen Hurts and not really the fact that he was coming back from an injury. That was kind of brushed off a little bit after, the first couple series. But after the game, it felt like a lot of people were just not satisfied with his performance, and this standard, I guess, of the passing game for some people was just not met in Jalen Hurts' last game. He threw for 130 yards or something, and A.J. Brown was obviously at the forefront of that, where you see AJ on the sideline with his book, and everybody, well, one, it's a little bit strange because I've never seen that, but, you see him on the sideline reading a book, and everyone's thinking right away, like there's got to be something, right, that's bothering him, right? He's not involved enough, and he feels like, he's frustrated, or there's something going on there, obviously, right? Because he didn't make too much of an impact. He only ended up having one reception, but they still ended up winning the game, and it never felt, again, like it was going to be close or anything like that. So, people turn and question Jalen Hurts' ability and really the Eagles' passing game going forward, right? As if this is a big problem that we might have to worry about, right? If he does have to rely on the passing game, if we do have to come to a point where Jalen maybe has to go on a 2-minute drive and we have to win because of his arm, right? Not necessarily Saquon if we're down a touchdown or down 4 points or something like that, right? Then the question becomes, what do we do then? Or is there enough confidence in Jalen Hurts and his arm for people to believe that he could actually win a game throwing? And also, he's going to be playing in this upcoming game against Matthew Stafford. And then the differences also become a bit more evident, right? When you have Stafford, who would love to win a game throwing the ball 40 times, 30 times, right? And he's just all about throwing, it feels like, especially in the playoffs. So seeing how they differ there, and maybe if the Rams are winning and Jalen Hurts, doesn't have the same numbers as Matthew Stafford during the game, that also, becomes a point of people comparing the two, and right away, probably looking at Jalen as, he's not doing enough, or this passing game and Jalen Hurts' arm is what's going to end up costing the Eagles in some people's minds. And honestly, I just don't really see it like that, and I don't really see it as that big of a deal. Honestly, when they're winning games off of their run game, and that's clearly their identity. Of course, ideally, you want to be a balanced offense, right? Everybody wants to be a balanced offense, but everybody has their thing that they're lenient towards, right? The run game, the pass game, if you will. Different variations in how you apply to the passing game and run game is also all varied. But I feel like just some people are very good at one thing, or very good at the other. I don't think it's that big of a deal, especially when we're talking about the teams at this stage, right? If we're talking about a major concern about someone's pass game, then they wouldn't be here, I feel like. So I don't really see this issue with the Eagles passing game. I know Jalen's not really leading too many passing statistics, right, over the course of the regular season and things like that, which is something a lot of people look at. But I think people lose sight that it's simply a thing that just needs to be present, or it's simply they just look at the stats, the passing yards, the touchdowns and things like that, and think that if someone's ranked 15th or 20th or something like that, that it means they're getting carried or something like that, or they're not pulling their weight. And I think that it's not a matter of fact that they're not doing what's necessary of them. I just feel like just because they're not doing it doesn't mean they're not capable of doing it, right? There's been a couple games where Jalen's thrown for over 260 yards and they've won. I think all of those games, I believe it was 3 or 4 where that's happened. And my biggest thing with him is just decide not to really pass the ball that much, right? Because all these games, it just feels like they got a good grip on them. Why have Jalen throw for like 300 yards if you have the game under control with your running game, with an absolute just brick wall of an offensive line, right, that no one's going to get through? I feel like there's no reason to kind of force it, right, if you don't have to. And the stats may not look imposing and things like that, but it also doesn't mean that what Jalen is doing is insignificant. I don't want it to seem like they got Saquon and now he's doing all the work and Jalen's just kind of back there just giving him the ball and like kind of like, here, like, get us the win. I'm not going to do anything, right? He is still doing very, very, underrated things, I guess I would say, as a quarterback in his performances, right? I mean, you look at the game against the Packers, and in these three categories, right, 10 throws of over 10 plus yards, in the second half, just kind of getting the statistics from the second half when the games, get a little bit tighter, and his stats against the blitz. These three categories Jalen Hurts did very well in, right? On throws of over 10 plus yards, he was 4 of 7, had a quarterback rating of 124.4 on those passes of 10 or more yards. Then in the second half, he was 7 of 8 with 92 yards. He averaged almost 12 yards per attempt, and he had a passer rating of 154 in the second half as well. And then when you brought pressure and when the Packers blitzed them in that game, he was 3 of 5 for 62 yards, 12 yards per attempt, and 143 passer rating as well. All of those numbers are very, very good, right? In terms of accuracy, quarterback rating, and the significance of the second half and yards of over 10 or more yards, right? All of those things matter, and it might not show out in the highlights that you might see after the game, but they do play their role in how this offense operates. And, Philadelphia is also 13-1 with Jalen essentially, playing like this, right? As soon as they found their identity with Saquon and really found a way to kind of take advantage of that, Jalen's been playing like this for really the majority from the bye week to the end of the regular season, and they're 13-1, and people are still, I think, trying to make a big deal about this passing game, like, oh, once the moment comes, like, that moment's going to come, and we're going to see, like, Jalen mess it up because he's not necessarily dominating in the passing game so far. Again, just because you don't see it, just because they don't really do it that often, doesn't mean they're incapable of doing it, right? They could very well do it when you got wide receivers like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, right? You can find the way to impact the game in the passing game when it's required. I just feel like it's not been required that often of them. And you look at these stats also from when they came back from their bye week to the end of the regular season and where Jalen Hurts stacks up in these categories, right? In terms of passes of over 10 or more yards, Jalen Hurts in that time period from the bye week, again, to the end of the regular season, completed those passes 56% of the time for 942 yards, 6 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. He had a quarterback rating of 122 in passes of 10 or more yards, which was third in the NFL. Then you look at his second half stats in all of these games from the bye week to the end of the regular season. And in second halves of games, he was completing passes at 69% of the time, 851 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a quarterback rating of 120 yards, which was second in the NFL in second halves alone. And then in moments when he was facing the blitz, again, same time period this season in the regular season, he was completing passes against the blitz at 64% of the time, 648 yards, 7 touchdowns, and a quarterback rating of 124.7, second in the NFL in that quarterback rating. And he's only had 2 giveaways since the bye week. Again, things that don't get headlines, things that you don't see on social media, like Jalen Hurts threw for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, right? Impressive, but all these other things are situationally things that, all the great quarterbacks do too, but, other quarterbacks, like I guess Joe's the first one that jumps to mind, his numbers are a lot more impressive, right? And I think that just has to do with the circumstance of your team. They don't have a running back like Saquon, obviously, so he's got to be the focal point of everything. And I think it's funny when we were talking at the beginning of the season and really stressing the Eagles to find their identity and really get Saquon involved, right? Before the bye week, and then after the bye week, it's all about Saquon. He's the number one guy. They look dominant. They look like they found who they wanted to be. And now people, it feels like, got a problem with that, right? Like, now they're doing it too much. What about your passing game? Is that still sharp? That's how I feel people are talking about it now. And isn't this why they brought Saquon in anyway, right? Isn't he showing how dominant and special of a player he is for being selected second in the draft, and still, like, people have a problem with him dominating games and being the number one guy? Like, I don't know what people expected to happen when you were going to put Saquon behind that offensive line, right? Like these numbers, this performance, and this impact that he's had, we're seeing the kind of player that he should have been, ideally with the Giants, if they ever, kind of gave him a little bit of help there. But with the Eagles and the kind of infrastructure they already had, you add a guy like that, I don't know what people were expecting, right? If he was going to come in and dominate like this, which is what they brought him in to do, especially after their collapse, you were going to take away from some of the other guys. And I don't think, again, it's a problem as long as they're winning games. If they were losing games and they were like 500 and things like that, then this argument, I think, would be more valid. But they're one of the best teams in the NFL, so I don't really see what the problem really ends up being. And, we had the same conversation almost ahead of that Steelers game, like I mentioned before. And, what happened? A.J. Brown went off, Devontae Smith went off, and Saquon only had 66 yards that day against the Steelers, but still, they dominated that game through the air. So they're talented enough in the passing game to put up better numbers. And if that moment comes, I trust Jalen to make those throws if and when it becomes, needed in a game, right? The situation hasn't popped up, so they're running the ball because that's their identity. And again, they're able to do it. There's no problem with them doing it. And I wouldn't be surprised if the game against the Rams, which I did pick the Rams, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go out there and AJ has like close to 100, Devontae Smith has like 70 or 60 yards and like a touchdown or something like that, and Jalen throws for like 3 of them. That also wouldn't surprise me, because you look at how this team's built, how the passing game could just benefit from the run game too. They're probably the most complete team left in this whole thing. So I'm not really worried about it. I think people are overblowing it at this point in time, and I feel like we're going to see a moment where Jalen's going to have to prove it in this game, and I'm confident in his abilities to do so. I don't think it should be a major problem. But, we'll see on Sunday, I guess. But that's just my feelings on it. But we got a couple more segments to get to on today's show. We're going to get to our power rankings now. After the break, we're going to rank the 8 remaining teams left in the playoffs. I'll give my reasons why for the power rankings and just kind of my explanation for why I have each team where I do. So we'll be right back with that. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here quickly now on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to, I think for the first time in my time doing this show, I've done a power rankings. I actually don't think I've done one of these ever in any of these segments, so we got a first time here, I guess, on the show, doing my very own power rankings here. And I think the divisional round at this stage with these teams left, it was pretty interesting to try and rank them, because once I got past like 6 and I started ranking the other teams, it became extremely difficult. And I mean, it was fun doing it because everybody's so good now, obviously, so it makes it that much more interesting to kind of fit them in along the power rankings. But without further ado, I mean, here they are, starting off with number 8. We're going to work our way up to the best team left in the divisional round. For a disclaimer, I made these rankings on Super Bowl contention, right? They're ranked on who I believe can not only make it to the Super Bowl, but also who has, the greatest chance of actually going and winning it, right? It's not based on talent of roster or anything like that. That's just merely a factor in all of this. But again, if it was based on talent, the Eagles would be number 1 anyway. So I based it on chances of making it to the Super Bowl and obviously winning it. So different factors go into those prerequisites, right? So that's why I had the Houston Texans in at number 8. To me, just a depleted squad, a lot of injuries, a lot of hurdles to get through at this point in the season, and they've had to get through a lot to even make it to this point, right? With the injuries to Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, those are extremely tough to get over, and you lose Stephon Diggs kind of before the halfway point of the year, or pretty early on, actually. You lose Stephon Diggs, so that's a huge blow. But even before that, you had the injury to Nico Collins that, had him out for a good amount of time. Before that, you had the injury to Joe Mixon, and based on how both of those players started off the year playing so well, you lose Joe Mixon, then you lose Nico Collins, right? Then you lose Stephon Diggs, and then it's just really Tank Dell and those guys out there. And it just feels like a lot of hurdles in unexpected ways at unexpected times. And for a team that was so talented, and a team that I really had ranked up there as one of the final contenders, in this thing, it feels a little bit unfortunate, right? And I just feel like, it gets to a point where the talent starts to show up, and they're unfortunately not able to have all their players out there. So that's why I had the Texans in at number 8. I feel like it's going to take a lot for them to keep winning games, especially when they play the Chiefs tomorrow. So unfortunately for them, I have them at number 8. And then not too far off, might be a little bit low for some people. It's almost the same thing, With the Texans, it's the fact that they're injured at a very bad time, obviously, of the season. But with the Commanders, right, I just feel like they just need more. It's not like they're missing a lot of wide receivers, right? This is the group that they started with, and this is the group that they, I guess, envisioned, making it through the majority of the year with. And I just feel like at one point, the talent difference between some positions, because the NFL is such a collective effort, it's so team-based that, especially winning a playoff game, you need all aspects of your team to play very well. And it's hard to do it with, to kind of reference the NFL, one guy scoring 45 points and everybody else just kind of playing hard defense and not turning the ball over and contributing with 10 points or 15 points, right? When some guy's just on his day, not missing, he's doing everything right on a basketball court and he's scoring 40 points, it's not the same thing. That could happen in the NFL, but it's really not going to amount to too much. And I feel like, in just this instance, especially with the Commanders taking on the Lions, I feel like it's just too much now. We're going to see a pretty big difference in terms of defense. I mean, Jaden Daniels might go out there and do his thing, but everything else, right? Their ability to stop the Lions, right? If they just continually allow them to score, are they going to be able to keep up? That's all the factors that kind of went through my head. So that's why I had the Commanders in at number 7. I just feel like at this point, they might have reached their limit when they take on the Lions. But they're very fortunate to have Jaden Daniels. But still, I got him in at number 7. I definitely think they're lacking in some departments compared to the Lions. So In at number 6, I have the Los Angeles Rams, right? Just basically their young defense. It's kind of sporadic. Sporadic, I thought, was the best word used to describe them because their defense is very good. They got a lot of great players, like I mentioned, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, Jared Verse, and Braden Fisk. Their young defensive line is already one of the best defensive lines in general, but they do got a great offense also to kind of allow those guys to play pretty freely, pretty, loose, right? If you're getting out to leads and you're playing very well on offense, you're letting these guys rest on the sideline, I think they're benefiting from that a lot as well. But I'm just not so sure that in the toughest moments where maybe the offense really isn't humming and really isn't all just bells and whistles, right? When in terms of success out there on the field, I wonder if this defense can sort of reciprocate the sort of support and performance that their offense usually does for them, right? If the defense is playing bad, then usually you can rely on this offense to at least put up points. But I'm just not so sure if the defense can do the exact same thing at this point in the playoffs, right? I think they have a great group and everything like that, but they're facing their toughest test of the entire year. And this is the litmus test if they're really able to be considered in that true contendership status. But until I see it, I picked the Rams to win. Until I see them win, I'll always have my doubts about them, at this point at least. So I have them in at number 6. And then at number 5, we're going to go over to the Baltimore Ravens. And for me, I got the Ravens, I guess, this low for a good amount of people just because they've fallen short a couple times. And, I understand if you understand the sentiment of if it's not now, then when with this team because of how talented they are and the fact that they added Derrick Henry, right? But like I kind of alluded to before, right, when you get into the playoffs and the postseason, everything just feels different. Even if you've played a guy before and in the regular season you beat him or you played pretty well, if that guy's Patrick Mahomes and, the Ravens have fallen short to him on a couple times, you start questioning that, and they've just not been able to do it in this part of the game. And while Patrick's, elevated himself to among the greats already, Lamar Jackson and this Ravens team hasn't been able to beat them in the playoffs just yet. And what's interesting about this topic, and I'll give away number 4 already because it's going to be the Bills, but I'm doing that just because it relates to what point I want to make. And I'll just show you the Bills now, right? Kind of moving on to them. These two teams are so similar to me because both of them, I have fallen short in twice because that's really what it's all about for both of them. And both of the quarterbacks especially because they got the same guy standing in their way, it feels like, each and every year. Josh has not beaten Patrick in the playoffs. He also hasn't beaten Joe Burrow in the playoffs. Lamar hasn't beaten Patrick in the playoffs. He's lost to Josh Allen already in the playoffs. But I think what's interesting about both of these teams and why I had the Bills just slightly ahead of the Ravens in at number 4 is because when Lamar's played in the playoffs, when the Ravens have played in the playoffs against the Chiefs, it always feels like at one point during the analysis or anything like that, it always feels like people turn their attention to Lamar because all the pressure's on Lamar, right? It always feels like when they lose or they're not playing well, the pressure, the fault is going to go on him. And it is unfair a little bit, but also I think we've just seen more instances where Lamar maybe has missed a throw here or there, or they're passing too much, they're not really running it, or he's not really running it too much, right? And we go back the next day and think that if he would have done this or if he would have done that, they could have been in a better spot to win this game. With Josh, and why I have the Bills slightly higher, is because I feel like in the playoffs, it's usually not been on him. It's usually him playing Patrick Mahomes wire to wire, second for second, responding each time Patrick does something. And the times they've lost, it's been on the defense when they let him score with like 13 seconds left and then into overtime. I believe last year, Tyler Bass missed a field goal that made them lose the game. It's never really, it feels like, on Josh. And to his credit, too, because he's played awesome, but I feel like with the Ravens, a lot of it falls on Lamar. And that's why I had Josh just slightly ahead of them. That's why I have the Bills slightly ahead of them in terms of my power rankings. I've just seen them play a little bit better than the Ravens against the Chiefs specifically in the playoffs. So that's 5-4, and now it allows me to move to the top 3, and I have the Lions as my third team. While they're very talented, while I love the way they play, this would be, their first Super Bowl with a lot of young guys, with a lot of guys that really haven't been there. So I just worry. I feel like that's something that I value more than maybe a good amount of people, right? Because people will look at this Lions team and think that they have everything, that they're dominant and everything like that. But if you, I mean, I don't know, because I'll obviously never been in the Super Bowl or anything like that. But I can only imagine, like, from hearing other people talk about it, and the Chiefs, talk about it all the time. Not to make it sound bad, but if you haven't ever been there and you have that whole week of media, you have a lot of free time on your hands, just unable to think of anything else but the Super Bowl and how things are going to go. This is going to be their first one in the team's, potentially, the franchise's history. Dan Campbell's never coached in a Super Bowl. Jared Goff's played in one, but he's lost in it. I feel like all of that, it plays into my decision-making, right? If you've never been there, never dealt with anything, any setbacks in the Super Bowl or anything like that, that could be a huge blow for you. And every little detail matters. So for the Lions, that's why I kind of had them at 3, where maybe some people would have had them higher. I just value that pretty highly. So that is what I had on there. And lastly here, just to kind of close out the episode here with these segments, or with these last 2 teams, as the number 2 team, I had I'm sure you can guess it, I had the Philadelphia Eagles. For the Eagles, I mean, they got everything. They got the talent, and unlike the Lions, they've been there. Not only have they been there, they could have beaten the Chiefs in that Super Bowl. I'm still sticking to the fact that if maybe Jalen Hurts doesn't fumble, I think before the first half, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe the Chiefs scored on it, then the Eagles probably win that game. But, a mistake like that, of that magnitude, is always going to be, just elevated a lot more. It's going to be blown up a lot more. It's going to be more significant, especially in the Super Bowl. But they're very fortunate to have, AJ back again, Jalen back again, a lot of guys back from that Super Bowl run. And now you add a guy like Saquon. They have the talent. They got the experience now, especially losing a Super Bowl, and how they're going to learn from that. I think they have the best chance of making it and contending for a Super Bowl. Of course, outside of number 1, I don't think it's to anybody's surprise, the Chiefs have the best chance of making it to the Super Bowl. They're the number 1 team left in the playoffs for all the reasons probably that you've heard already, right? That they've been there, obviously, for the last 6 years. Patrick, insane in the playoffs. If you need any sort of throw, any sort of moment, any sort of, clutch performance, you're not going to take anybody above Patrick, in all honesty. And Andy Reid, of course, a terrific job, just coaching them and getting them well prepared for this point of the season. You got guys like Travis Kelce, who people write off every year because the regular season's not looking typical for Travis Kelce, but then in the playoffs, again, they ramp it up. And if you think that they're clinical and error-free in the regular season, just wait until they get into the postseason, where they never really beat themselves, and they put a lot of pressure on their opponents to be perfect. And they got a good margin of error to work with also, to be fair, because of Patrick Mahomes. And this year, I just feel like they're a lot more well-balanced and just well-rounded because of guys like Worthy, Hollywood Brown, Travis, and other guys that they've incorporated as well. They're running the ball a lot more, and it just feels like, while it doesn't look so flashy and dominant in that way, they're methodical, they're clinical, they're calculated with every little drive, with every play. I think they got the most drives of 10 plays or more in the NFL. That's not by mistake, right? These guys, the details that these guys play with is insane. And they're chasing history, right? They're chasing a three-peat, which obviously has never been done before. And if they've made it the last 2 times, you get a good sense that they have a good idea of how to get back there again. So those are my power rankings. Those are, how I see each team lining up, kind of comparing them to each other. And we'll see how the power rankings sort of shape up, I guess, going into next week. And also, we'll see how many of these teams are eliminated. If the top 4 move on, maybe we get an upset like I've predicted. We're going to talk about all of that next week. So that is going to be the end of today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the Chip Shot Football Podcast. And if you guys would, please subscribe, like, comment to the channel as well as the show. And also, if you want to see more content on the Chip Shot Football Podcast, go over to YouTube and visit both of the channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where we have more content and more coverage of the NFL on the Chip Shot Football Podcast regarding coverages, breaking news, reviews, previews of the game, covering the playoffs all throughout the duration of them. Join me each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for these live shows as well. But for right now, I'd like to wish you guys a great weekend. Go out there, watch the games, and we'll all come back here on Monday and talk about, I'm sure, all the craziness and unexpected things that have happened over the weekend. So, again, thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys back here again on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit and the coffee ain't hit.